Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for tuning in to today's Friday Forum. My name is Audrey Stewart, and on behalf of Harvard Bookstore, I'm so pleased to welcome you today to today's event with Claire Zalc discussing her new book, Denaturalized: How Thousands Lost Their Citizenship and Lives in Vichy France. She is joined today in conversation by JOY DE MENIL. Harvard Bookstore's Friday Forum takes place on Friday afternoons during the academic year as a way to highlight scholarly books in a wide range of fields. Through virtual events like today's, Harvard Bookstore continues to bring authors and their work to our community and our new digital community during these challenging times. Every week we're hosting events here on Zoom, and as always, our event schedule appears on our website at harvard.com/events, where you can also sign up for our email newsletter and browse our shelves from home. Today's discussion will conclude with some time for questions. If you have a question at any time during the talk, go to the Q&A button on your screen and we'll get through as many as time allows. If you would like to buy a copy of Denaturalized, there will be a link in the chat where you can purchase. All sales through this link support Harvard Bookstore, so thank you, especially during this difficult time for community spaces like your local bookstore. There will also be a link in the chat if you would like to donate and give additional support to Harvard Bookstore. Your purchases and financial contributions make this virtual author series possible, and now more than ever supports the future of a landmark independent bookstore. Thank you for tuning in support of our authors and the incredible staff of booksellers at Harvard Bookstore. We sincerely appreciate your support now and always. And finally, as you may have experienced in virtual gatherings these past few months, technical issues may arise. If they do, we'll do our best to resolve them as quickly as we can. Thank you in advance for your patience and your understanding. Now, I am so pleased to introduce today's speakers. Claire Zalc is a prize-winning historian. She's professor at the School for Advanced Studies in the Social Sciences in Paris, research director at the French National Center for Scientific Research, and the director of the Institute of Modern and Contemporary History at the École normale supérieure. She is joined today by JOY DE MENIL. JOY is the executive editor and director of Belknap Publishing. She previously worked as a trade publisher at Random House and Viking Penguin, where she published many award-winning books. Today, they are discussing Claire's new book, Denaturalized. How do we trace a citizen made alien by the law? How do we solve a murder when the body has vanished? Claire tells us the horrifying story of how French citizens, mostly Jews, had their citizenship revoked and were sent to concentration camps during the Second World War. Julian Jackson called it an important and original contribution to the origin history of occupied France. And on that note of praise, I'll turn things over to you, Claire and JOY. Thank you so much for both being here today.
Thank you. So I will begin with, JOY, do you want to say something or should I begin?
Let me just say first, because it's not often that I have an opportunity as a publisher to thank an independent bookstore. And we really depend on the discernment and support of independent bookstores to create communities of readers around important books. And so we appreciate the fact that Harvard Bookstore has been so supportive of Harvard University Press, of Belknap, but also that, that it plays a crucial role in this community, not just of scholars, but also of interested readers. It is an important partner for us in bringing really cutting edge works by scholars to a wide press. So just a quick note of appreciation for Harvard Bookstore. And I have to say that I'm thrilled to be in conversation with Claire. And our format is we will start with a presentation about the book by Claire, and then I will ask her some questions, and then I look forward to hearing your own questions and to opening up the floor.
Thank you, JOY, and I wish also to thank Harvard Bookstore for the invitation, and JOY for agreeing to participate in this conversation today, and all of you of the audience. And I wish first to apologize for maybe expressing myself not as fluently as I wish. but unfortunately, I haven't spoken English for quite a while due to obvious circumstances. I wish I could be there for real, but I'm not. And I hope at any rate being understandable, and don't hesitate to ask me some question if I'm not. So I prepare some slides so you can have some images to present you briefly the book. According to the New York Times, denaturalizations have ramped up under the Trump administration. And over the past 3 years, denaturalizations case referrals to the Department of Justice have increased 600%. You certainly know the American case more than I do, but this is a global phenomenon. The increasing practice depriving people of their nationality leads to our modern definition of citizenship. My book presents itself as, in a way, a detour, if I may use this French word, to address this issue by looking back at the past. In this particular context, the episode of denaturalization conducted under Vichy between 1940 and 1944 offers some avenue for reflection. It was, so I hope it's okay. It was launched by the Vichy regime at the very outset of its existence. Marshal Pétain, that you can see here, became the head of the French state, État français, the new regime that succeeded the Third Republic on July 10, 1940. And he immediately intended to make denaturalization one of the cornerstones of his national revolution. The law was promulgated 12 days after taking office. The review of naturalizations was a top priority and a centerpiece of the new French state policy. Yet, at the end of we know little about these denaturalizations. There are reminders that certain well-known figures were the victim of this policy, including the families of the singer Serge Gainsbourg, that you may know, and Jacques Derrida, along with Marc Chagall and his wife. Yet the bibliography remained quite slim. Why is this so? This relative ignorance is a result of silence on two fronts. First, there is the silence of the law. Here is the law, issued on July 22, 1940, which implemented denaturalizations. And I am reproducing here the integrality of the text. The law, I use inverted commas here because it was not voted properly since the French state has dissolved the assembly. So no regular laws were voted, it's more than like a decree. But like you can see, it's short, simple, it's quite rare to be able to reproduce a law in one slide. And above all, you can see that it is totally silent, regarding the criteria that were supposed to guide decisions. No target is mentioned in any manner, nor crime nor offense are mentioned. The only thing the text said is that a review of all acquisitions will be conducted. No need to call for an offense here. We have to do with a review of all the naturalizations granted from 1927. Why 1927? The date was not chosen at random. It referred to the law of August 10, 1927. This 1927 law is considered the most liberal law in the history of French nationality. It lowered the residency requirement in France to 3 years instead of the 10-year period established before. And now it's 5 years, just you to know. The second major problem is that the Commission on the Review of Naturalizations, which was the institution established to carry out the policy, left no archives, or at least no one has been able to locate them. In my opinion, one main reason for this is that André Mornet, that you can see here in your screen, was sitting in the commission. he had a particularly controversial and distinguished career after the war. He served during the war as the vice president of the Commission from 1940 till the spring of 1944, but is best known for being appointed by General de Gaulle as prosecutor for the Haute Cour de Justice, which meant that he was in charge of the post-war purge of judges who were accused of collaboration. He oversaw the Laval and Pétain trials, and one can surmise that he didn't want to leave traces of his own activity as a member of the Commission. So that's why no archives at all of the Commission. So how can I do? Yet traces have survived. Traces of the denaturalization process are in the individual files themselves. You can see a lot of them here. Each naturalization file includes a slip. You can see a lot of slip there attached to the cover that indicates the Commission's decision. Maintain, withdraw, inquiry. There is also the name of the Commission's reviewer and sometimes a note left inside. You can see one here, Ashkenazi, Turk. They collectively represent enormous archives as the Commission opened around 250,000 to 300,000 files from September 1940 to August 1944. And since the files are family-based, the number of people affected is closer to about 1 million. Let me reassure you, I didn't open all the files. I'm only human. But my appetite for numbers can be here a good thing. I selected and examined a sample of 1,000 files, and I immersed myself in the inner workings of administrative practices to conduct a kind of archival ethnography of the traces left by these procedures. In a nutshell, I attempt to carry out a quantified ethnography of the files. To understand how the process occurred, it is important to have a sense of how the reviewers concretely worked. That is why I'd like to show you the basic material of their daily work, by which I mean the naturalization files. This is the Bienenfelds, the Georges Perec family, a French novelist you may know, and you can see him in New York. They requested nationality in 1927 and obtained it. But their file was examined by the Commission in December 1940. As you can read, if you understand French, the reviewer recommended that a withdrawal, retrait for the entire family. And the reason indicated on the slip is Israelite, pas d'intérêt national. Israelite, not in national interest. The whole family was denaturalized in March 1941. David, Shaja, Bianka, and Ella were no longer French. They lost the citizenship they had acquired 13 years before. The family reacted. David opposed the decision shortly after the denaturalization decree. He wrote this letter using the pronoun he to refer to himself instead of I. That's quite funny. So I'm quoting, Mr. David Bienenfeld and his family have had the painful surprise of learning that their French nationality has been withdrawn from them by the virtue of the law of July 22, 1940, a measure that has thrust him into a state of great consternation. He tried to emphasize his French qualities, indicating that he always personally behaved in a correct manner and as a good citizen. His wife served during the war as a nurse and lost her brother, André Perec, the father of Georges, by the way, who gave his life and was killed on duty on June 19, 1940. and she's providing the education for her 5-year-old orphan nephew, the famous George. He attached to this letter many documents attesting to his Frenchness, letters from colleagues, proof of his service in the French army, and so on. But this appeal was rejected, except for Bianka, that you can see here, the eldest daughter. And she is a friend of, I don't know if you can recognize her, Simone de Beauvoir, who is just sitting next to her. Why Bianka was finally renaturalized? It's because she was married to a Frenchman. So for her, the decree was repealed in July 1941. This leads to the first question raised by this book. How did one choose who is a good and who is a bad citizen? In the book, I'm interested not just how the Vichy regime concretely defined them, but most of all, how they distinguish concretely between good and bad citizens. The power to decide is not easy to wield, as reviewers sometimes hesitated. Look in this file. I found a small sheet of paper. Paper was in rare supply because of wartime shortages. This case prompted a debate. The file was deemed to be of no great interest for naturalization, pas grand intérêt à la naturalisation, you can see here, although the reviewer issued a proposal to maintain, cependant, proposition maintenir here with this point. This is, and while he continued to ponder over the issue, and this is a crucial point, one should bear in mind that behind the big word of administration, there are also individuals who have substantial power. And the decision is not easy to make. The issue is to discuss the relationship between routine administrative work and ideology. When and how does violence play out in ordinary power relations? The first criterion is relative to the Jews. On this file, Abramovich's one reads the comment here, médecin israélite roumain, Romanian Israelite doctor. But you absolutely have here to recall that because of secularism, the French Republican administration ignored Jewish identity. Religion disappeared from the items in censuses in 1872. Neither religious nor racial belonging appeared in the Republic's record, and this is still the case today. It's totally forbidden by the law. So how did they work? How did the reviewers work? They came up with an onomastic solution. They identified Jews by means of first and last names. And it is important to note, once again, that this anti-Semitic identification preceded the implementation of anti-Semitic legislation and its legal definition of Jews, because this one was October 3rd, 1940. Or if you can see here, this, you cannot see it because it's on the top, but this file was written on September 1940. So this is the evidence that this file was written Israelite before the status of Jews was enacted. And one can observe the gradual and concrete transformation of onomastic anti-Semitism into bureaucratic routine. Sometimes attributions could be questions. One would imagine that the reviewers hit bumps along the way and made errors. The Abram family of Grenoble was denaturalized on October 27, 1942, most likely because of the sound of their last name, which was similar to Abram. The family was of Italian origin, and no element suggested that they should be designated as Jewish. The daughter of the family, Maria, wrote a letter of complaint indicating that she was stupefied by the decision. And the decision even appeared to be incomprehensible for the agent at the Grenoble prefecture. He added here the comments, motif ignoré, reasons unknown when registering the decision. The initial absence of a legal definition of Jewishness reinforced discretionary power. I decided to show you this small sheet of paper because, again, the reviewer hesitated. He wrote the name of the individual, Ashkenazi, then the country of origin, Turkey. And if he was asking himself, Hadid Israel? He appears to be confused by this last name that sounds Jewish, but with a previous citizenship that for him did not relate to this name, Turkey. It appears that as though the reviewers were ill at ease, and then finally he asked for an inquiry, renseignements généraux and militaires. This brings me to the next point of this presentation, the crucial question of the connection between denaturalization and the implementation of the Holocaust in France. There is, as you may know, a heated debate in France. Some columnists have been arguing that Vichy regime's intent was to protect French Jews. I evidence how this is absolutely not the case. Denaturalizations played a crucial role in identifying naturalized Jews. For over 5 years, they exposed them to police scrutiny and inquiries. Each and every time an inquiry was ordered, the police came to the person's homes and contributed to making them more vulnerable to state power. The chronology of events was very often tight, swift, as this example shows. Loss of nationality on March the 20th of 1942. Notification of the loss had to be given in person. Maurice Abramovich was called to the police station. On April 29th, 1942, 1 month later, he was transferred to the occupied authorities, interned in Drancy camp and deported in June 1942. Denaturalization deprived him, like many others, of the relative protection offered by French citizenship. And in this sense, this policy actively contributed to Vichy regime's implementations of the Holocaust in France. In this book, I finally address the issue of the meaning of citizenship by looking at the trajectories of the individuals after their denaturalization. As we saw earlier, the denaturalized were called by the police to be notified of the decision. As part of this humiliating ceremony, they had to hand back their ID documents. And I found many of them in the archives, including this one, all these ID that were given back to the authorities. At this point, one is able to realize what nationality concretely represented. Veterans lost their pensions, and there are many of them who had served in the French army during the campaign of 1940. This person, this Hilda Carasso, lost her job as a teacher, as many civil servant and municipal employee jobs were reserved for national citizens. It was a matter of status, political and national, but also economic and symbolic. The denaturalized reacted when confronted with such serious difficulties. 30% of them wrote a protest letter of some kind. These letters are highly interesting material because they are very moving and show how people internalize the definitions of what a good French person was under the Vichy regime. one can observe what I have called the grammar of Frenchness, in which they expressed the virtues that were expected from a French person. The range of arguments differ from one person to another. For instance, gender played a role. Women implored and begged for mercy, while men sought justice and reparation. The way loyalty was determined in the Vichy context may help us better understand how racial, social, and political biases can be embedded in a systematic and bureaucratic profiling that discriminates in terms of constructed national identities. How does this story end? I hope I'm not too long. One can distinguish three different ends. First, the May 24, 1944 ordinance by the French Committee for the National Liberation in Algiers repealed the law of July 22, 1940. But that was neither simple nor easy. It was a major subject of debate within Free France, and that is really interesting. In September 1943, François de Menthon said he was in favor of confirming the law to de Gaulle, because he said the policy of the Third Republic was much too liberal. He ultimately retreated due to René Cassin's firm intervention in the debate, who argued how necessary it was to repeal such a law. The second hand of the story could be dated on August 18, 1924. That is the last date on which the Commission met and worked. Just until the last days of the war. You have to just remind that the liberation of Paris is August 25. So I have evidence of August 18. They are still working in the files. Their reviewers continued to review and to sometimes revoke naturalizations. The third ending date is less precise but more surprising. The story actually continued after the liberation, despite the law being repealed. As you can see in this slide, all of the files of those who were denaturalized were again reviewed by the Ministry of Justice to determine if revocation proceedings were deemed necessary. So you can see here, November 1924. The administration, which was maintained in the same offices, could not pursue without resistance the eradication of over 5 years hard work. On the individual scale of the denaturalized themselves, the end of the story did not yet mean formal notification. They were not informed simply because the law was repealed. Nobody returned their papers. In the files, one often finds letters bearing such questions. In the end, am I French or not? The story shows that what nationality concretely represented for people by studying the situations of those who lost it, and sometimes for a while, but sometimes forever. Thank you.
That was a wonderful presentation, and seeing those documents and the photos of the people whose lives were transformed is really very moving. It also gives us insights into how challenging it must have been to go through these files, to decipher these little pen notes and to try to make sense of them. I think one thing that I was very struck by is often when we think about the complicity of office holders in a bureaucracy who are implementing laws that are considered unjust, we think of this as, in some respects, a simple moral choice. But what you have indicated and shown in your book is how much, as you say, how much discretion there was in the interpretation of the law and in the implementation of the law. And you speak about actually, following the individual judges and trying to understand, because there's so little to go by, what was the logic that was driving their decisions. And you, in your book, you talk about geographical differences, political differences, and a variety of different concerns. You said that in Isère, you would have one set of reasons for being denaturalized, but that was only because, and concluded that the person reviewing the file was the single most determinant factor. Can you tell us a little bit about what this meant to you, just the variations in the implementation of the law, and how you understood, the role of individuals in the bureaucracy?
Yeah, thank you, Joy. I did not elaborate a lot during my talk about this issue, but this came out to be one of the big issues addressed in the book. It's the question of the role of the individuals in charge of the policy. What was very striking to me, I mean, I did not expect at all such a result, and I really have to confess this. I mean, it's not a demonstration, it's a result, is because I did not want to show to the audience all my tables, but I count a lot. And I count to try, because I think I don't like maybe a lot the numbers as I do. So I counted, and what the result of the counting is that what is the most important by all the criteria, like the profession, the country of origins, the age, the marital status, and a lot of other things in the model, what plays the major role is the person, the individual person of the judge who is examining the file. I could not believe it at the first sight. I thought it was a mistake of the model. So I did it again and again and again and again. That was the most important thing. And there are two different personalities. So I went through the careers of the judge to try to understand, because just to let you know, there are 30 judges in charge of examining the file and working in the commission. So as I said, I don't have any archives of the commission's work, but I can have the career files of every singular judge. And what is quite, it's not, we cannot speak of funny, but quite interesting matter is that the very, let's say, benevolent judge, the most benevolent judge, when you are in the pile of the files, they are in charge of, you have many chances to have your nationality maintained. They are both fans of social sciences. And I don't say that because I'm in Harvard bookstore, even virtually, but that was quite astonishing for me. Both are sons of teachers, and both of them are in parallel with their judge career, they are following classes at the university, at the Sorbonne, of the Durkheimian sociologist. On the other side, the very, let's say, mean judge or very zealous judge, the most zealous, if you are in his pile, it's really not a good thing for you. He did all his career in Algeria, and he came into Paris in 1938. So so it's like he was used to this kind of discrimination by his previous career. And that is really, for me, important to see how the individual personality can play finally a role. And I mean, that is also a political, maybe thing that we can think of now, that a lot of, we have this, this political debate about some democracy, which are going into kind of bizarre review of legislation, what is the rooms of maneuver of bureaucrats and civil servants in this kind of state. So I think that could be interesting to elaborate the reflection upon that. Just a last thing about your remarks is about the geographical references. I did not mention it at all, you're right, in my talk, and there is a whole chapter in the book devoted to this geographical interpretation of the law. And this is also fascinating. And of course, when you think of American case and the geographical differences on the territory can be interesting, because the interpretation of the who is a bad or who is a good citizen differs a lot from a place to another. For example, in the Isère department, Isère is near Grenoble, near the Italian frontier, to be they are very much focused on political matters. They are denaturalized communists, mainly communist and socialist. But when you go to the Vaucluse near Avignon, that you may know, they are totally focused on morality of the people, and they are denaturalized mainly moral offenders, homosexuals, and all the people who are accused of kind of moral infamy. And if you go to a third one, I just did 4 departments. I did not do every department. In the north, in the Pas-de-Calais, they are totally focused on Jews. They just want to denaturalize Jews. So that is really interesting to see and to show these rooms of maneuver.
So I think, you know, we are on the cusp here of a big and important election. And one of the things that is much discussed is the question of voter registration, who is being disenfranchised, who is being allowed to vote. And I think that we also today have been having very difficult national conversations about the question of who is a good American and who is not a good American. And our democracies, the French and American democracy, developed along different paths, but with some real important overlaps in their foundation. And I thought that it might be interesting if you could just tell us, because there were a number of different important stages from the period of the revolution up until the 1940 law, when the question of who could have their citizenship revoked changed. And obviously having your citizenship revoked is different from not being allowed citizenship in the first place. But I thought maybe if you could take us through, and I was very surprised to learn that there was a special statute in 1848 that specifically revoked citizenship from people who were slave owners and traded in slaves. But why don't you tell us a little bit about the important sort of steps along the way to who this question and how it evolved of who can be who can have their citizenship taken away from them, who can be denied the right to vote.
It's really the same process as the citizenship rights is building. The citizenship can be revoked. You cannot think they are totally entangled, the two processes. So that is very important to have in mind, is as much the law is liberal, the more possibilities to revoke are. So that is quite not easy to realize, but in the French history, it's the case. So as you said, the first measure was in 1848. And why 1848? Because it's the first time that there is the suffrage universal right to vote. I mean, it's of course it's a universal male universal, because woman was not in the universe at this time. But anyway, it was the first time. And in this law, there is this measure concerning slave owners. So they forbid it, they say that if you are slave owner, you won't have the right to vote because you won't be French anymore. The second measure was passed during World War I, and it addresses the question of enemies citizen, meaning that they review the naturalization of all the persons of German and Turkish origins, because Germany and Turkey was enemies at this time. It was passed in 1915, so in the middle of First World War. And that is also interesting to notice how this question of revocation of nationality is linked with the war and with the war context. It's very, very linked with the war context. And then I'm just speaking of the French case. About the American case, there is a wonderful book by Patrick Vales about American denaturalization. So I refer to it many times, and you can of course look at it if you are main. But I'm speaking from the French point of view. Then in the 1927 law, which I just referred to in my talk, this was the most liberal law ever passed in the French nationality legislation. In the same law, there is a whole paragraph on revocation with all kinds of cases, like when you have political problems, and when you did some crimes, and when you've done some bad things. So there is this possibility in the 1927 of revocation. What is quite different in the denaturalizations is that, as I showed, in 1940, there is no crime, no offense, nothing, no criteria. It's the only moment where anyone can be withdrawn from his nationality, French nationality, without any motive. So the decision does not have to be motivated. So that is quite new. It's like it's open all the possibility of revocation. Now the revocation still existed, and you may maybe remember the huge debate after the terrorist attacks in France in 2015. François Hollande proposed as an answer to enlarge the possibility of revocation, nationality revocation to terrorists. And that provoked a huge debate. And my book was just published in the middle of the debate. It was not at all common, I swear. I worked on this subject for 8 years before, and now it's not at all related to the Trump election. I was that also. But you know, you are questioning, of course, the past with your own question of the present. And of course, the question of revocation is very much a topical issue now for years, I mean, for 20 years. I mean, when you are looking to India, there are a lot of issues also about revocation. So, but just to be back to the 2015 debate, François Hollande proposed that, and there were a huge controversy raised by this proposition. Finally, he did not go through it. He renounced, finally.
That's actually very interesting. It gets back to this question of who is French, which remains a very live one. Before we turn to that, I just wanted to ask you if you can clarify how you went about trying to piece together the relationship between denaturalization and deportation. And was it possible for you to follow these people after their file had been stamped? How, and if you did do that, how did you do that? And what did you find?
I did that name by name. The thing is that as I said, I did not open all the files, so the work can be pursued. But all the files that I had, I went into the deportation lists to check if the people were or not deported. And so I could follow then the rhythm and the link between the denaturalization and the deportation. It was not automatic. I have absolutely to say that. They are not always linked. For example, I have some examples, sad examples of people who were denaturalized after having been deported. And so they are in Auschwitz for 2 years and denaturalized in 1944, but deported in 1942. And I have some examples of this kind of deconnections. So it was not an automatic link between the two processes, but when you can follow them by just searching their names in the convoy lists, you can see and observe how the rhythm, I don't know if I'm pronouncing correctly, the rhythm, thanks, the rhythm are connected. I'm sorry for my awful pronunciation. It's hard.
Well, one of the people who joined the talk asked if you could talk about your research process for the book. You know, I think that I do think it's worth emphasizing how much of a challenge it was to embark on the process of reconstituting a destroyed archive. So we'd love to hear, and I know that you're pioneering new methods in the sort of use of data analysis for historical ends, and it might be helpful if you could also talk a little bit about the work in those terms.
Okay, so thank you for the questions. My research was first, it was quantitative. I selected a sample of 1,000 files randomly. And then I took one by one these files. As I showed, the files are denaturalization files, and they are not denaturalization files, because the denaturalization was based on the naturalization files. So I opened the file and I was just trying to get what were the traces inside the file left by the commission. Little notes, slip, everything that was in the file. So that was the ethnographical part of the work. On the other side, I had a database, and I put all the information concerning the file with the final result, the final decision, maintain or not. So I had this both, that's why I'm saying I'm doing this ethnographical quantification, because for me, both are the same work for me. It's not in one side, ethnography, on the other side quantification. They are totally entangled. Even in my database, I put something, some indications of, for example, it's too bad I don't have the table here, but in the little slip, you can see the name of the reviewer. You can see also if the commission met morning or evening, like M for morning, S for evening, soir. And I put this information in my tables. And I try to see then at the end if to review a file on the morning or on the evening, it played or not a role. Because, you know, I know as a jury member that you are more open on the morning and you're more, for me it's night, but you are in the mid of the day now and you are more open than me. I'm a little tired now. So I try, and in fact, it plays a role. I mean, decision of maintain are more often taken on morning than in evening. And you see how this ethnographic method can have some result to try to quantify not just big categories as we are used to, like profession or country of origin, but also some tiny details that can then have some role in the final decision. So that was the main thing. The second thing is that I had an awful accident during my research, is that the National Archives, where all my files were, closed from one day to another because of a problem of the construction of the building was falling. So I was stuck without any, I did not finish, I was just 900, but I had to finish my 1000. That's why I decided to go to the local archives, just because I needed to have more files. It's not, I did not intend to go to the, and I choose my department just because my mother has a house near Avignon. I have a friend who can house me in the Isère, and that drives me with one of the biggest results of the book. So what I want to say is that a lot of historical research is also this kind of story, that you are, you know, inside a detective process and you are trying to go, and then, and what that is why I love my job, is because you can be astonished by your own result and what you found. So
that's a wonderful story. It really is. Here's another question saying the current estimate is that 72,500 French Jews and Roma were killed during the Holocaust. Do you think that is an accurate number?
What, it was
72,500.
Yeah, it's very hard to say. We say mostly 75,000 Jews and Romanian, but it's hard to say exactly killed by the Holocaust, because the file that we have is a deportation list, the convoy list. So we know who were deported. So we can have a very accurate number of who were deported, but we don't have any evidence of who returned. We know that very, very few return, of course, but if we want a very accurate number, it's impossible to give one specific number. When you are working on numbers like me, you know that a very, very specific number is always wrong, because you cannot give a number one by one with historical data.
Yeah. I just will say to Laura Robachek, the questions are being deleted as they're being asked. And if your question was accidentally deleted, then if you can just ask it again, then I will ask it. I am curious about one other thing, which is you read through many moving testimonies by people who were making a case for their Frenchness. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if that, what reflections that brought in you about this question of what it means to be French, and also whether and how you feel that people, if they were to approach that question today, would answer differently. If you were someone from a Muslim family who was making a case about Frenchness, and I think that in a way, François Hollande's measure was both saying, well, here is someone whose conduct is un-French, unworthy of French citizenship, but there is also this tension within France about, are Muslim citizens full citizens? Do they have allegiance to another country? But I'm just curious about what you found both moving and whether you think people would answer that question differently today.
For me, it's the best chapter of the book. I mean, the one I love is chapter 8, because it's just focused on those letters. And at the beginning of my work, I wanted just to focus on that, on this, because the material is incredible. It's not exactly testimonies, because they are written in the middle of the process, not afterward. So it's really like some very rare traces of what people are, and I wanted to give voice to those people by giving a lot of abstracts of the, a lot of examples and quotations of the letters. So there are a lot, and they are really moving, but I have also to analyze them, of course. And the categories of being French at this time were linked with no political affiliation. They are always saying, I am a good French because I don't have any political activity. So, and also because I am in a French family, meaning I have my children are French, my wife or my husband is French, or I have an uncle with. So it's really something about the big French family. Nothing about religion. No one is speaking about religion. And in fact, since now, you know, this secularism debate that is very important in France and very, very different from the States is leads us to think that even the Frenchness, if I'm sure it does not exist, but the Frenchness is supposed, even if it's supposed by the politicians to be linked with some ethnical considerations, no one can argue for that to claim for his or her Frenchness. It's not possible, because if you're doing that, you're not French. Because if you are good French, you don't say a word about your ethnic affiliation.
There's one last question, which is a broad one, and then someone left a comment for you that you can read, but which is just, how did you become interested in this? And did you find obstacles along the way?
Okay, I'm a historian of immigration for years. So I worked first on immigrant shopkeepers, and then I worked on Jews, persecution of French Jews. And each time I use naturalization files, because I love this kind of files, because they, as I showed, there are a lot of traces of individuals themselves, and that's very rare. And each time I noticed some kind of annotations of the commissions. So it's really the materials which drove me into the question.
Well, thank you. I don't know if there's any additional questions. It seems like we covered it, and I have to say that the central question at the heart of your book, which is what happens to people when they have their citizenship revoked? What happens to, you know, what does it mean to be French or to be American? What, can you be a good citizen or a bad citizen? At what point do you cross the line and deserve to be stripped of your rights? And what does it mean when that happens to your legal status? These are all questions that feel very relevant, I think, today. And it's a book that I read here with many thoughts about our own situation. I have to say that it is fascinating to think about the implication of the fact that both religion and ethnicity are banned from census. We've been undertaking our own census, and one of the questions was about you know, ethnicity and status, and the fear that people would underrepresent themselves and feel that they might be targeted. But in the US, there's a very different approach to these questions. And so it's interesting to see that it provided some measure of protection in this period from this law. But thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you to everyone who joined us. And thank you again to Harvard Bookstore.
And good luck, and don't forget to vote. We are hoping.
Yes. Don't forget.
Please vote, everyone. Thank you both, Claire and Joy. Thank you so much for coming and talking to us. This is This is very important, and I'm glad we can continue these conversations. And thank you all at home who are tuning in today and showing up for authors, publishers, indie bookselling, and our incredible staff here at Harvard Bookstore. Again, if you would like to support Claire, Belknap Publishing, and the bookstore, click the link in the chat to purchase Denaturalized. We sincerely appreciate your support now and always, and have a great rest of your day, everybody. Take care, vote, and wear masks.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.